you must have heard about the Trump tariffs. It's all over the place. The countries around the world are reacting differently. I mean, Canada is a little bit scared, not necessarily putting back, tariffs, and they're scared because America is their largest trading partner. So if you put that tariff, it might affect them. China is going haywire. In fact, it's as if there's some sort of crazy war going on between US and China. Many persons think that all of these tariffs are actually targeted towards China, but because some of the trade deficits, some people would point out and said, look, China is having much more advantage over the United States, and Trump wants to change that. We'll speak to that all across boards this lovely morning. We have a guest in the studio who is going to do justice to that particular topic. He is a global affairs analyst. Amobi Ifediorah is a development economist. Good to have you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it's not news about this tariff because Trump said this is what he's going to do during his campaign. There are a lot of countries who have taken advantage of America, and then this is what exactly he's going to do, bringing jobs back, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. With what you have seen so far, how far has he gone? Do you think this move would in any way bring back manufacturing, bring back jobs to America?
Well, thanks for having me. Will it bring back jobs to America? To a small extent, yes. Basically, and since that has been his objective, create jobs, grow the American economy, as well as increase revenue from tariffs to the U.S. It will have its pluses, it will also have its minuses, but I think it will have more negatives than positives. Generally because tariffs, what's a tariff? A tariff is a tax on imports. And so if you are a high, or a large exporting country, you make money from your exports, but the importing country now pays that tax, which is that tariff for imports, which is a general rule, basically. In Nigeria, we have it here. We have, our import taxes, custom tariffs and stuff like that. Now, the problem or the issue that the U.S. is going to have is not because they're imposing tariffs, because tariffs have always been there. It's the fact that the U.S. president is now using tariffs as a weapon of intimidation to other countries, trying to bring the countries to the negotiating table. So what does he do? First and foremost, he imposes a flat 10% tariff on all U.S. imports. And so any country that's importing to the U.S., just know that you have a baseline 10% tariff. Then he now introduces what he called reciprocal tariffs. And that is, he now looks at two things. One, the existing export tariff that the country has with the U.S. For instance, Nigeria exports oil to the U.S. Nigeria imposes a 27% tariff on the U.S. So Trump is saying, well, if you're going to impose 27% tariff, on us, and we have like a 50%, trade balance. So, in other words, Nigeria exports more to the U.S. than it imports by, almost double. So Trump is saying, well, in that case, you're going to have to pay more. It's almost like a law of reciprocity. So instead of since we are since you are charging us 27%, we will charge you half of that, and that's how the 14% thereabout came about. So, but what is happening now is that this is actually a global thing. It's not specific to one or two countries. It cuts across almost every country in the world. So you're indirectly now gingering a trade war between the US and the rest of the world, which will have its own disruptions. I mean, value chain disruptions, increase in prices across not just the US, but in these countries, decrease in revenue for a number of countries that will not be able to afford these tariffs, so on. So, in terms of jobs, Trump accuses a lot of countries of being unfair to the US. That these countries have taken US jobs out of the US and are producing certain goods in their countries and bringing them back to the US. It's not because those countries are doing that specifically that is wrong, but the US also has to take a look at its own internal productive economy. US is one of the countries that have very, very huge and strong unions. So most countries in Asia, union activity is almost zero. And so while the US workers are demanding high wages and better working conditions and so on and so forth, countries that don't have these union activities that can produce at cheaper costs because labor is cheaper, take over these jobs. US businesses find it even cheaper to produce, to actually manufacture their own products outside the US, like Apple and the rest of them. Yeah, and so when Trump is saying, I will impose tariffs on China, for instance, in order to bring jobs back, internally, the US also has to look at its own labor laws and see how would Apple even want to close its shop in China and bring it back to the US, where it's going to cost them more to produce an iPhone, for instance. Those are some of the questions and the issues that have to be addressed.
Right. I'm also thinking of the fact that sometimes some of these decisions are made based on facts on the table. He says that these countries have taken advantage of America over the years. I mean, the countries that has been labeled as reciprocal tariff are countries that have also taken advantage of the US. Even before the tariff, those countries have had lower tariffs from the US versus theirs. So do you think that this move makes economic sense, at least just to, I mean, if you say let's do 50%, then I should do 50% too. I mean, it's just normal for us to be at par.
Yeah. On paper, one could say yes, because it makes sense when you actually look at it. In reality, it's going to be difficult to implement.
Why?
If I am an importer into the US, say Nigeria, right, and US imposes a high tariff on me, it's going to hurt me naturally, because I'm going to be, it will actually hurt me because it's going to hurt the revenue that I make from exporting to the US. But who's going to pay that high tariff or tax in the long run? It's the American consumer. So in the long run, it doesn't make political sense, given that you are a democracy, because your people, I mean, see what's happening in the US today. Almost every major city, there are protests about increased prices. You can't even find eggs on the shelves and stuff like that. For a country like China that doesn't have that democratic setting, they can afford to retaliate, because if prices go up in China, people will just absorb it. They can't hit the streets and stuff like that. And so at the end of the day, it hurts you more as the American and hurts your own political base, because now even Republican congressmen and even some of the MAGA faithfuls are even reconsidering their vote, and they're like, this is not, I mean, you said you were going to impose tariffs, but maybe we didn't understand what it was all about. But today we're losing our jobs, prices are getting higher by the day, and so on. And so it creates a lot of disruption. Now, can he sustain it? No. He won't be able to sustain it, because tariffs have never really been a tool to achieve what he wants to achieve.
Does it look like somebody who, we understand that he has made several comments and then made several policies and then withdraw them, but I think he's strong on this tariff thing. Does it look to you like somebody who would retract?
He's going to actually draw it as long as he could until it gets to a point where, if, for instance, if what we witnessed last week, or what we're witnessing now in terms of, the protests and so on, if it grows, more than it is today, he will have to reconsider. Because at the end of the day, the whole idea is to benefit the people, to make America great again. And if it is not making America great, then something is wrong with that whole model. And so, yes, as much as he will be, stoic in terms of saying, this is what I want to do and I don't care, which he has said so. And yes, people who can't afford it, just swallow it for now because tomorrow things will get better. People are like, yeah, tomorrow will be better, but I'll be dead by then.
True.
Yeah.
Right. So, for Nigeria, how do we navigate it? How does this affect us? Because I've seen the federal government's release statement saying it won't affect so much. They had to go back to the budget to check the plus and minuses, and then for Nigeria, how do you think it would affect the country, and how can we leverage this issue? Because I mean, it's an international issue, and it cuts across. So we're also looking at the opportunities from these issues. How does Nigeria leverage on these kinds of things to, gain advantage from whatever it is that is happening?
Well, it's going to have an effect on Nigeria naturally, but it's not going to have a huge effect. Okay, let me just put it this way. It's going to have a direct effect and it's going to have indirect effects. Now, of course, the direct effect is that it's going to hit our revenue because we have been exporting to the US over the years under the AGOA scheme, the Africa Growth Opportunity scheme. Now, an AGOA is a zero tariff scheme. So we have been exporting to the US and paying zero taxes. We have been importing from the US and charging them 27%. We export to the US more than what we import from the US. And so it's a trade deficit for the US, which is what's making Trump upset. It's like, hey, Nigeria is one of the countries that's actually, cheating us. And so we have to reciprocate. Now, with 14%, we're going from zero tariff to now paying 14%. So it will cut into the revenue we get from our exports. It will also affect our reserves because, building up our reserves is also revenue from exports. So if we're now paying a tax that we didn't used to pay before, it's going to affect, our foreign reserves. So that's one way. Secondly, Nigeria being an oil producing or oil exporting country and a member of OPEC, and because this Trump tariff is global, it's going to have serious effects in the global oil market. So it might not hit us directly, US Nigeria, but it will hit us indirectly because we are part of the oil ecosystem. So what's going to happen now is that we're going to have to start paying more for a lot of the things that we pay for today because we're paying this, tax. And so we should expect to see prices, go up slightly, depending on how, depending on the effect of this is both direct and indirect. I don't really have a figure. I can't say it'll go up by 5% or 10% or 20%, but we will see price movements domestically we will see, price, not only prices of goods, but prices of services go up. Now, we import from the US, and so we are going to have to also, pay that extra from the cars and so on, etc., that we import. Will it affect us much? Not. It won't hit us much, because over the years, we have had even our own customs, Nigeria Customs Service, announce every now and then that there'll be say 70, 80, 100% custom duty on Tokumbo cars and stuff like that, and it hasn't been much of a disruption. All we've seen is that the price of cars, a Toyota Corolla that was 3 million before, is now 10, 14 million. So we're going to see more of those things for those specific goods that come in from the US. So ICT, machinery, auto, textiles to some extent will get hit. We will also see increased prices from other countries that also are affected by the US. So the shoes that we import from Italy, all our designer products that we get from Europe, because Europe is going to be hit, they will also spread this cost across board. So it's not just the high prices coming from the US, it's also coming from our other trading partners that will spread this cost across their various trading partners. So yes, we will expect to see prices go up. That will be at least one of the effects that will be glaring. Increased prices, decrease foreign reserves, in those areas. And of course, with increased prices and so on will now come, with the increases in taxation will now come with it some job reduction capabilities, because a lot of companies will now scale down to minimize costs, which would mean laying off some workers or cutting down on labor. And so those are some of the effects.
I'm particularly surprised at the fact that we're going to have more costs, incurred for some of these things. You just mentioned vehicles, like you mentioned the car moving from astronomical move from 3 million to 10 million, and the numbers are still going up. If we have to import, then it has to be that high in price. Then is there a way to then think outside the box? Must we import from the United States? Because I'm sure that it's not all the countries that are doing the same thing. If we decide, let's start importing from the United States, maybe move to China, move to UK, move to some other countries, would it also affect them?
Well, they are also affected by the same tariffs.
Okay.
So, and then you see, the cars we import from, say, Dubai or Europe or Germany are not Dubai-made cars. They're also American cars.
Oh.
They're also cars made in the US. So whether we import them directly from the US or we import them through third-party countries, it's still going to hit. Wow. And then also besides, since we're on US-made cars, US-made cars, just like even European cars, are not specifically made in the USA.
Okay.
Detroit in Michigan is a location where most of the cars made in the US come from. So take a car maker like General Motors. Tennessee, also in the US, mines the metal that is shipped to Pittsburgh in Philadelphia, where it is converted into steel. The steel is exported to Canada, to a plant where it is cleaned up and polished. Canada exports that polished steel to Mexico, where they make pistons. So Mexico now converts that steel into pistons for General Motors. The pistons are exported back to the US, to Detroit, which is now used in building your Chevys and your Buicks and your Pontiacs and your Oldsmobiles and all, the rest of them, and your Fords and so on. So now you have just one US made in USA vehicle that has gone to Canada, from Canada to Mexico, and every time it crosses borders, a tariff is paid.
Wow.
So by the time you add all this value, because a tariff is what's called an ad valorem tax, it's a tax on the value. So it's almost like a VAT. So by the time it goes from one country, goes back into the US, goes to Mexico, comes back into the US, at every stage there is a tax on it.
Wow.
So by the time the car is produced in the US, Americans are now paying more for that vehicle. If it leaves the US and comes to Nigeria, or goes to Dubai and then comes to Nigeria, we even pay more than the Americans pay.
Yeah.
So that's the global effect, and this is how it's going to affect not just vehicles, but almost every product that comes to the US. The US is a huge economy. There's a lot of treatment of goods and inputs that go from one country to another in the production of some of the products that we consume. Your smartphone, although it is, say it's a Samsung from South Korea, there are components of that Samsung that even start from Africa. Europe, Asia, before it even gets there, and then comes back to the US and then gets exported.
Wow.
So, it's going to affect. That's why it is seen as a trade disruption. It will be a global disruption. So, what will Nigeria have to do to avoid this? First and foremost, is to assess this effect on us. And it's not just saying, okay, well, we only export 10% of our trade to the US, therefore it's not going to hit us well. There's that indirect impact that we are going to be hit with. Can we sit down with the US and negotiate this? And that would be one of the best options. Because fine, Trump has said, well, 14% to Nigeria. If we negotiate 14 to 13, even 13.5, 0.5% might seem small, but in terms of the volume of trade, it can save us, quite a bit. So we can sit down and renegotiate and try and say, okay, fine. President Trump is a transactions president. He's a deal maker. You say to him, okay, this is what Nigeria will put to the table. This is what you get out of Nigeria for this to happen. US companies can come in and play more part in the oil and gas sector for a reduction in this tariff. Trump could weigh the options and say, okay, that's fine. Instead of 14, we'll do 6%. Now, some other countries that are stoic, especially those in the European Union and Canada, are looking at it and saying, okay, well, within this whole equation, we have a time factor here. Trump has less than 4 years from today.
Yeah.
Can we wait this out? Can we, we drag this until, he's not coming back after 4 years? Yeah. And so, do we as Nigeria have the capacity to wait? No. So the option is to negotiate.
Wow. So as it stands, is there anything that we can do, maybe short term or long term? Can we think inwards, those things that we import from America, maybe start looking around whether it's something that we can manufacture within, even though not short term,
Yeah. Well, a short-term measure would be to pivot away from the US and say, okay, some of these things we're bringing in from the US. Can we look at China? Can we look at the EU? Can we look at Canada? as alternatives. So instead of importing our 100% today from US, we can cut it down to 60%, 40%. That way we minimize this tariff thing. But these other countries that we're going to now look at, AGOA doesn't apply to them. So they also have their own tariffs.
Yeah.
So we have to wait and say, okay, well, for the EU, what are we going to be paying? For Canada, how much are we going to be paying? And then we weigh these options and decide whether it's a better option or whether to just stick with the US and pay this. I mean, we've been paying nothing in the past. So if we try and work it out over time and say, okay, for the past 10 years, we haven't paid a penny. In the next 4 years, we are going to be paying 14%. Let's factor it in 4 years, 10 years. We do the arithmetic and we find that we're actually paying about 2-3% per annum, over the past and into the future. So there are various ways one can look at it and to see what we can actually stomach.
Just because of time, we are out of it right now, but I want to say a very big thank you, Amobi Ifediorah, a development economist. Many thanks for your time and your analysis this morning. I'm sure we're going to continue engaging these issues. They're not done yet because we're still yet to see 1 month, 2 months, 3 months into it to see how countries have, reacted to it. I understand that the White House said that over 50 countries have called for negotiation about it. So Trump is the one that allows for negotiation and for deal making. So hopefully we have our country also doing the same.
Yes, and that's actually one of the things that Trump sees as success or victory. The fact that he's able to get countries to now come. He brags over it. Oh, they're calling me now. They're coming. They now want to talk. For him and his own personality, that is the attention. Now, whether they negotiate or not, the fact is that they're now seeing him as
the big man.
The big man.
Anyway, thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
All right, Amobi Ifediorah, a development economist. I want to say a very big thank you for being part of the broadcast today. We are connecting to our Abuja studio to continue this broadcast. It's a morning show. I'm Charles Pius. Good morning.
Signature TV, news in your pocket.